Welcome to Garden Wise Adventures. My name is Malie, and today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what is blooming in my garden. This is mid-July, and I just finished switching over my front yard to a drought tolerant garden, and I wanted to show you what is blooming. Now, a lot of people, when they think of xeriscapes or drought tolerant gardens, they think of rock and non-blooming plants, but I wanted to show you how pretty it can be and how many blooms you can get and still be drought tolerant. Now, one of the first things I wanted to talk about is how I have set up my yard so that it conserves as much water as possible. So the first thing that I did is add 4 inches of mulch. Now I'm considering adding a chip drop, which will change the look of this garden. Right now I'm using what is called a compost mulch, and I'll show you a picture of what that looks like. Now the compost mulch has done a tremendous job of conserving water. I'm only watering everything about every 2 weeks right now, and it's all on a drip system. Now my drip system is laid out in a grid pattern, 18 inches apart, and I just turn that on every 2 weeks. Now I do have to say I have added some annuals and some fruits in my front yard that need to be watered more often. And rather than water everything, I take a bucket and I hand water twice a week my strawberries, and then once a week to watering my alyssum. And there is one area in my front yard that I actually water twice a week, where I put a bunch of annuals and veggies. So anyway, let's show you some of my favorite flowers that are blooming right now. Now I hope the sun is not too strong, but this is one of my very favorite trees. This is Vitex agnus castus. I've done videos on it in the past, and I'll probably do an update video on it here shortly. But if you look, the pollinators just go crazy on this. This started blooming about a week ago, and this will continuously bloom until nearly frost. Last year, the last blooms were in October. The main bloom will end, around August, and then we'll just get sporadic blooms through the end of the year. So the one down below is a pugster butterfly bush. This one is called amethyst, and they're absolutely gorgeous. And I'll link a video above that I've done on these in the past. And this is another one that's going to bloom through the end of the year. You can see the succession of blooms. This one is finished. This one's right in the middle of the bloom. And then there is a new bud. And it'll just continue on like this through the end of the year. Now, this is not the only pugster butterfly bush that I have here. There are different varieties, there are different colors. And my other one that I have, I like even better. And this is called pugster blue. It's actually a true blue. Hopefully it looks as blue as it does in real life on video. The form's just a little bit different, but this is also a pugster, and it'll bloom all year long. Now this one starts blooming a little bit later than the amethyst. You can see the amethyst is a little further along in the bloom, but they're extremely drought tolerant, great shrubs. Now right below my Vitex agnus castus is my moonshine yarrow. These are also extremely drought tolerant, beautiful flowers with a long bloom time. This one started blooming later than most of my other moonshine yarrows, and I'm not exactly sure why, but I love that it waited to bloom until my Vitex bloomed. Maybe that's what it was doing. But let me go show you my original moonshine yarrow. This one is a seedling from that one. Now this gorgeous big beauty was planted in 2009, and it has just done its own thing ever since. I have never fertilized it. This gets watered once a week because it's on the same zone as my food forest, and my food forest is really young, so I've been watering that once a week. And look how beautiful it is. This one, every year it seems to have a different length of bloom time. Last year, it was still blooming near the end of the year, but in previous years, it blooms for a couple of months and then stops. But you can see the succession of blooms we have down here. We've got the older blooms, we've got new blooms down below, and then we've even got some new buds. So this one's still, mid-July, is still going to be going. This one started blooming near the beginning of June, so we've already had about 6 weeks of bloom, and it's absolutely gorgeous. Here we have a new plant to me that's ending up being one of my favorites. This is a penstemon called Candy Crush, and it's been blooming since the end of April. And look at this, isn't it gorgeous? It just seems to continuously bloom. I don't know if it's going to bloom through the end of the year, but I will update you on how long the bloom cycle is on this one. I have several of them around here. The butterflies, the bees, and the hummingbirds all love it. So this is another gorgeous one. Here we have another brand new one. This one is a pine leaf penstemon in the orange color. There's yellow, orange, and red, and they're all gorgeous. Now this should get about 3 feet wide, I think, when it matures. I've got another little baby over there, and I'm definitely getting more of these. I'm not sure how long the bloom time is, but I think this soft orange color is absolutely gorgeous. Another one that's just finishing up its bloom cycle is all my lavender. I have several lavender bushes around. These are all Munstead, and once the blooms are done on these, which will be in about another week, I'm going to cut them back to where the green foliage starts, and they'll just be a nice green mound. But lavender is a fantastic plant for about a month's worth of blooms through June and the beginning of July. And we're also just ending my lily blooms. Next year I think I'll probably have to give a tour of all my lilies as they're blooming. I didn't do that this year. But here is one of my stargazer lilies. I think they are gorgeous. And then we have a later variety right here that just has a different look to it. I really love these. We also, which is done blooming, had a trumpet lily. Well, we actually have 3 of them in my yard. This one bloomed a brilliant yellow. And so if you get different varieties of lilies, you can get at least a month's worth of bloom, as they do their succession blooming. So lilies are another great way to get flowers in midsummer. Now another one that's blooming that will bloom throughout the entire year that's extremely drought tolerant is catmint. So this catmint is a division off one of my older plants that I've loved. And normally this time of year you need to get in there and prune this back. Just prune back all of the spent blooms. I've never really pruned mine back before because this is what it looks like. And you can already see deep down inside that we're getting another succession of blooms starting, and it just keeps going. This will go and bloom until the frost kills it. Brings in pollinators, it brings in hummingbirds. I've seen hummingbird moths on these, and they're easy plants to grow. They can take full sun, part shade, just about anything you throw at them. And these have been doing absolutely fine, being watered every 2 weeks. Now another one that's blooming that is really actually not one of my favorite flowers, but for some reason I've decided to keep them anyway, are my daylilies. This is a rebloomer. This is called Purple Returns. It's just getting into full bloom, and it is a really pretty flower. But this one has not been a consistent rebloomer for me. Once the bloom is done, the foliage starts to die back a little bit. You get the sticks in it. You have to you have to pull out all the dead sticks. Otherwise, it just looks horrible. But the blooms are pretty, so I have kept it. Here's another variety. I am not sure of the name, but the flowers are gorgeous. This one is not a rebloomer. It only blooms once. We have yellow returns. This is what it looks like after the bloom cycle is done. Now this one does rebloom for me once or twice a year. And it's really a pretty yellow. It's related to the purple returns. So happy returns and purple returns. So this one is going to stay. It had, as you can see, it had a ton of yellow blooms on it when it was in full bloom. Another part of the returns family is the red returns. Gorgeous flower. This one is more of a sparse bloomer than the other ones. So we'll see if we end up keeping these throughout the years, but right now the vote is just to continue to keep them. Then comes another one of everybody's favorites this time of year, purple coneflower. These are fantastic for feeding the birds later in the year, but if you do leave the flowers to go to seed to feed the birds, you are going to have them spread. All of these are seedlings, and they seem to be spreading throughout my front yard, which I do mind a little bit, but not enough that I'm going to get rid of them. I will probably cut back most of the flowers and just leave a few for the birds. But the bees also love these, and look how cute this guy is. Not sure what kind he is, but he's really cute. I don't think I've ever seen that variety before. Now another cute little one that's new to me is Germander. Now these have gorgeous pink blooms. They're a semi-evergreen plant, so we should have some foliage over the winter. We'll see what happens. And their bloom time has been surprisingly long. This one's been blooming for over a month, and as you can see, it doesn't look like it's anywhere near being finished yet, so I'll be interested to see how long this one blooms. Now here's another one that's new to me. This is a Sundancer daisy, extremely drought tolerant. It probably is not going to need much water at all next year, and this is supposed to be one of the longest bloomers in my yard. This one started blooming as soon as I planted it in April. You can see all the blooms on it right now. You can see all the new buds. And there's all the spent blooms. Now I have not deadheaded this at all, and it's still looking beautiful. So it sounds like you can deadhead it or not deadhead it, whichever way you choose. So Sundancer daisy, fantastic plant, and this will bloom until the frost kills it. This is another one that's new to me. This is another one that's going to bloom through the end of the year, one of the longer bloomers. This is Zauschneria. And the hummingbirds absolutely love this. This is definitely going to be a plant that I'm going to keep and possibly find other places for. It's extremely drought tolerant, probably need very little water next year, and very little fertilizer. So this is an easy one. It's a low growing ground cover that'll just flower for a long period of time. Now another new one for me, that's a low growing ground cover that's had a little more issues, and I think this one, it's because of the drought tolerance on this one. This is Partridge Feather. I think the leaves are gorgeous, but as you can see, we're getting dieback in the center. Let me show you this one over here. I pulled out everything that was dying back in the center, and what I think the issue with these is they are at the bottom of a slope. It's a very slight slope, but the bottom of a slope. So any water that gets put on here flows down, and we have some new plants and some plants that require more water near it. Now I hand water the plants that need to be watered more often, so I try to avoid hitting the ones that don't need water. So I think what has happened is that my Partridge Feather has been getting a little bit of the overspray from watering these plants. So I need to be a little bit more careful, which is going to be fine because the new plants that were put in are established enough that I don't have to water them very much, and my strawberries are far enough away that I think if I am careful with hand watering them, we won't be getting any more water on these. So we're going to pull out the dead in the center and see if it fills back in. But as you can see, they do bloom. They're ending their bloom right now with a little tiny button yellow bloom, and they're really quite pretty. Another one that everybody knows is Dianthus. Now this is one that I will put the name on the screen because this is my favorite one. I have not deadheaded these yet. These were planted the beginning of June, and they never stopped blooming. They are just continuing on. This is another one that's not been deadheaded, and you can see that I'm not going to need to do that for looks, but I may need to do that to continue the bloom cycle. Supposedly these will bloom clear into fall if I continuously deadhead them. But they're really pretty. And then when they're not in flower, they're going to be a nice low green mat. Now we'll start on the annuals that are blooming. So this is one annual, the only annual that I put in my Waterwise garden because it can take only being watered once a week. This is alyssum. Matter of fact, this is a reseeded alyssum, and so is that one over there. And they reseed if you get rains, and then they can go long periods of time. I've had in the past alyssum go 2 weeks, especially the reseeded ones, go 2 weeks without having any water. And they've done really well. So this is one that I planted, and it seems to need a little bit more water than the reseeded ones. But there's so many different colors. There's the whites and the purples, and sometimes you can get some that are even a little bit red. So here's an overview of what my garden looks like right now. It's going into the lull of August. The very next thing that's going to start blooming is my black-eyed Susans, which I have several of. And we also are going to start seeing my sedums bloom. And they're going to have a succession of color. So this is the Autumn Joy, and it's just starting. And then we've got some purple ones that don't have flower buds on them yet that will flower later in the year. So we've still got a long season of bloom to come. Now the last place I wanted to show you is my annuals and veggies that are not drought tolerant that are blooming. Now you can have annuals and veggies in a drought tolerant yard providing you hydrozone them. Put them together in a spot where you can just water them separate from everything else, so you don't have to water everything else to keep these blooming. These are right next to my hose bib, so when I fill the watering can to water my strawberries, I actually water these. So this is getting watered 2 times a week, sometimes 3. Right now it's in shade. It's about 11:30 a.m. and this does not see sun until about 2 p.m. but it's on the west side, so the sun is scorching. And I do have to keep a little bit of water on this to make sure things don't wilt. So what I do have in the back that is not annuals, that are brand new, is I have some hydrangeas, and I'll put the name on the screen. I think these are Firelight Tidbits. They're only going to get 2 feet tall and wide. In between them, I put some zinnias. And I just barely planted those, so they're just getting started. We have some Swiss chard for their colorful stalks and for food. We have some basil for its beautiful dark purple foliage that's starting to fill in. We have some beautiful violas that are still blooming. The color is absolutely gorgeous. If you keep violas in a little bit of shade and keep them well watered, they will continuously bloom throughout the year. Let me show you ones over here. You know, these are in a little bit of sun, but they've been blooming for the entire year. They sprouted from ones that were here last year, started blooming in the spring, and they're still blooming. And then we have my snapdragons. These are the Potomac series. We have apple blossom and yellow, and I just mixed them all in together. We also have my little nasturtiums that are just barely starting to try to bloom. And a little bit of alyssum. Now there's one last one that I almost forgot, a little perennial bloomer that blooms for long periods of time. This is ice plant. So we've got this gorgeous reddish ice plant, and if you flip it over, I don't know if you can tell, but it's a metallic purple underneath. These are gorgeous. Once the sun stops hitting them, when they're in shade, the blossoms will close up. This one's another one of my favorites. This is fire spinner. They just have this metallic look. Not all ice plant have metallic looks, but there are several of them that do. And they're just glorious little ground covers. Now, because they bloom for so long and so often, these are short-lived plants, so you can continuously take divisions and renew them to keep them going. So thank you for coming along with me on a tour of what's blooming in my yard in July, and I challenge you to try and find an area of your yard where you would like to see blooms and that you can put drought-tolerant plants so that you can water a little bit less and use our resources wisely. So if you like my videos, if they've been helpful to you, I hope you like and subscribe, and go have a wonderful garden adventure.